more time. There we go. I do this so often, and I need to finally fix my little Stream Deck over here, that I swear that I had it set up to turn back on my audio when I tell it to go live, and apparently I don't have it configured correctly yet. But I'll fix that in the future. That's not going to slow us down at all. One more time, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you happen to be. My name is Christopher Harrison, and today we're going to be doing what I like to call a code and coffee, where we're going to really just kind of play and explore. I do have a destination in mind. We'll see how far down the path we get there. Maybe we'll finish it out, maybe we won't. And if we don't, you know, hopefully we'll be able to come back in maybe a couple, 3-4 weeks and continue building upon what it is that we've done. And that really is my hope here, is that I hope that this can become the foundation for a little bit of a series and just continue to explore web development, and also continue to explore one of my favorite new things that's come out of Microsoft, that's come out of Azure, and that is Azure Static Web Apps. And so that's what we're going to be talking about this morning. I'm going to keep saying morning because I'm located here in sunny Seattle. It is actually sunny today, which is a little bit strange this summer. We haven't had kind of that quintessential great, like, you know, 3, 4, 5 weeks of just wonderful sun, that it's been, you know, a little bit hit and miss. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, yeah. So sunny Seattle summer morning, which is fantastic. This is live, so please, by all means, ask questions as we go. That one big thing that I want to make sure of is that we are making this conversational. So if it's just me talking into the void, into a camera, you know, it works. But it's certainly a lot more fun when there's engagement. So please do ask all the questions that you want. This is what we're here for. We'll chat, we'll explore, we'll play, we'll see what happens. We'll see where we go. Okay. So with that, let's go ahead and talk about Azure Static Web Apps. So for those of you who are not familiar with Azure Static Web Apps, Azure Static Web Apps was announced at Build. And what Azure Static Web Apps does is it really combines a couple of fantastic services into one really nice, neat package. That the first big thing that it takes advantage of is GitHub. And in particular, in GitHub, it takes advantage of this cool thing called Github Actions. And for those of you that are not familiar with Github Actions allow you to set things up so when an item is pushed up, when a PR is made, etc., that you can have something happen. And I'm being specifically vague there. I specifically vague. That's a fantastic phrase. I love that. I'm going to keep using it. I'm being specifically vague because there's a lot of flexibility in what it is that you could do inside of GitHub Actions. So you can absolutely do kind of the normal CI, continuous integration, and then maybe even CD where you go ahead and deploy it out as well, as you might expect. But you could also go in and say, like, start running tests and start running linting tools and start creating additional new files and kick off a workflow and really do anything else that needs to be done when a particular action takes place inside of GitHub. Now, the big thing that Azure Static Web Apps is going to take advantage of with regard to GitHub Actions is the deployment piece. So what you're going to notice is when we configure this, it's automatically going to set up an action for us that will take whatever it is that we've checked in. It will run it through a couple of different steps, and then go ahead and deploy it out into Azure for us. So that's the first big thing that's going to be taken advantage of. The second big thing is really just basic hosting, and Azure has had this ability for quite a while to be able to do this, that you could do this through really just putting it out onto blob storage. You could absolutely do static web apps there. You could, of course, do web hosting inside of app services and websites. I mean, absolutely, that's always been there. And so it's going to take advantage of that capability as well. So really just being able to serve out HTML, JavaScript, CSS files through blob storage. So it's going to take advantage of that. Good morning, Assam. Nice to see you. So, am I still here? Hopefully I'm still here. It looks like my sound is still good on my side. So hopefully that's going. If not, please let me know in the chat. Okay, cool. I am here. Love it. All right. So yeah, so it's going to take advantage of that. And then the last big thing that it's going to take advantage of is this wonderful service called Azure Functions. So Azure Functions, we talked a little bit about them back on Tuesday. You can check out the VOD either on Twitch, or if you go to youtube.com, Microsoft Reactor, you can also see it on demand there as well. And so there's a little bit of an exploration about functions. And for those of you that are not familiar with functions, functions are our serverless implementation. And so the whole goal of serverless and the whole goal of Azure Functions is to give you the ability to very quickly run small pieces of code without necessarily setting up a full architecture, without necessarily paying large bills, to automatically have scaling, etc. And when we think about creating apps using frameworks like Angular or React or Vue or whatever it is that you might be using, this is really a lot of times what it is that we're looking for, that we don't necessarily need a full Express implementation, that we don't necessarily need a full Restify implementation, that a lot of times most of the code and everything else is going to be running on the client inside the React. And really what we're trying to do is just create a facade for different services that are running behind the scenes. So if that's the case, why spin up a full-blown web server? I don't know. And that's where this comes into play. So if this is what you're looking to do, Azure Static Web Apps can be fantastic for that. And what's also great is you're going to notice that this is going to fit quite nicely into the workflow that you already have, that you're going to notice I'm going to use GitHub. You're going to notice when I get in and start writing code that I'm going to be writing JavaScript. So if you're already a web developer, you really already have a lot of the necessary tools in your toolkit to start using Azure Static Web Apps. Now, there is going to be a little bit of a learning curve with functions, and that's, you know, it is what it is. It's there, but you are going to notice that this will feel relatively native to you. So the question is about Blazor. I don't believe that this does Blazor as of yet. No, I don't think that it does, unfortunately. So the answer to that question is no. I apologize. Aaron Zira asked that question. The question from Exeget, can you add redirects in Azure Static Web Apps? So you could not really, no. So the question is, could you add redirects? So the catch that you're going to have here is, unlike doing something inside of, say, Express, where I'm going to send down, actually, no, wait, hold on. I'm going to take this back. You could. Because what you're going to do is you're going to send down an HTTP response. So you could absolutely go ahead and set the, I want to say it's 302. Please don't quote me on the status code. I'm trying to pull that right off the top of my head. But you could go ahead and just send down a 302 and go ahead and redirect that way. So I'm going to say the answer to that could very well be yes. Although the more that I talk about it, the more that I'm thinking you might have to still pick that up on the client and do a document redirect from there. So I really don't know. I'm not certain. I'm not going to say one way or another. If this was a test question, I would say no. I don't think that it's possible, but I'm not 100% true. Yeah. So the next question is, what about things like redirect from HTTP to HTTPS? Right. Okay. Let's oh, what's going to be the easiest way to do this? You're asking really good questions. I love it. Okay. I'm just trying to figure out what's going to be the easiest way to show this off. No. You're asking really good questions. Yeah. Okay. So let's try to talk through a couple of real quick things here, and also highlight the fact that this is a preview service. So let me make sure that I highlight that right away. So this is not necessarily going to be fully functional. So some of the things that you're going to expect from a normal web hosting environment might not be there yet, but they are going to be coming. So do keep that in mind as you're getting in and you're playing around with Azure Static Web Apps. That for example, one of the things that you could do, or that was announced, was support for custom domains. That actually just came live just a little bit ago. So so all of this is going to be coming. So as far as a redirect from HTTP to HTTPS, I'm not 100% certain if that's there. And the reason that I'm not 100% certain is because of the fact that it's hosting it sort of in two different spaces. That what you're going to have is a blob storage host that's going to be sending down your HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. And then you're going to have the API functions that are going to be actually running your behind the scenes code. So the redirect from HTTP to HTTPS, I'm certain that if that's not supported, it's going to be supported, but I honestly don't know how to set that up yet. But I am going to mention, and I want to make sure that I'm clear about this right up front, is the fact that Azure does automatically support HTTPS out of the box. So you could potentially just do this on the client side if the server side doesn't yet support it. I don't know the answer to the question of whether or not it supports it on the server. I'll be open and honest about that. So Kio's Dev asks, is this like Jamstack, Netlify-ish on steroids? Yeah, it is very similar to a lot of those different types of services that are out there. So this is certainly not necessarily something that is that's brand new, but it's still, I think, super cool. And I really like the implementation that we have here with Azure Static Web Apps. Okay, cool. It's a lot of great questions. I dig it. And by all means, in case you haven't noticed, ask questions. This is what I'm here for. And I'm also not afraid at all to admit when I don't know something. So yeah. So naive question, does it mean we cannot host React apps? The question from GA Crow. Absolutely, you can host React apps 100%. So remember the way that a React app is going to work, that what you're going to have is you're going to have I want this scene. What you're going to have with a React app is you're going to have your browser over here, And this is going to be running all of that client-side code. This is where all of my React code is going to be running, etc. So that React, at the end of the day, is nothing more than HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That's it. That's really all that there is to it. That yes, you're going to have your JSX files. Yes, there's going to be like all of those like fancy components and so forth. But eventually what's going to happen is you're going to use some form of a bundling tool that's going to emit all of that in just core HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So that for all of the magic in React, in Vue, in Angular, it's just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That's all there is to it. And so all of that is going to be running inside of the browser. All of the services, however, that you're going to be running are up here on the server. And those are going to quite frequently be written in JavaScript, but they could also be done in, say, Python, hosted out with Flask, or they could be in C# and hosted out in .NET, or whatever it is. And so those are really the two components that you're going to be working with whenever you're working with a full stack app, be it, again, you know, React, Vue, Knockout, whatever it is that you happen to be using. And so if we approach it that way, that all that we need to do is make sure that we're giving the user the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and that we're making sure that the JavaScript is able to call some function somewhere, we've solved all of our problems. So the answer to the question of can you host a React app is 100% yes. And in fact, one really cool thing that you're going to notice if you start exploring inside of here is that it will give you a template that you could go ahead and use with React. And you would also even notice, and I don't think it's highlighted on here. Yeah, sadly it's not. It's not highlighted on here, but if you went in and you took a look inside of the GitHub action, because remember that it's the GitHub action that's really going to make the magic happen here. That GitHub action can automatically handle the bundling and everything else for you. So if I come back to the browser here, let me highlight this little image right over here. So all of this is being done on GitHub. So back here, my push pull request, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create my JavaScript, my HTML, my CSS using whatever tooling it is that I want. And then I'm also going to add on all of my server-side code in the form of functions. And once that I'm done with that, then I'm going to push that up into my GitHub repository. My repository is then going to fire an action that will then start to do everything it is that I might want. So yeah, if you're using Webpack, then it would go ahead and run Webpack for you. And then once it's done with all of that, it will then push all of those artifacts up into Azure and then make that available. So absolutely, you can do React, you can do Angular, you can do whatever it is that you might want. Now, in my demo, when I get in and start writing code, I'm going to be doing everything in core JavaScript. And the reason for that is because of the fact that I don't want to assume any knowledge that there's a React camp, there's an Angular camp, there's a Vue camp, and I don't want to just go down one and make this then pigeonholed for just that particular framework. So I'm going to be doing everything that I'll be doing inside of just raw JS here, and that'll actually work out just fine. Okay. Let's see, Siska had posted out a URL for asking about routes and redirects, and unfortunately the URL is automatically being swallowed by Twitch. So unfortunately that's not going to be shareable through that. So yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. Are there plans to support repos hosted in Azure DevOps in addition to GitHub? Is a question from Caution Fang. My answer to that question is I'm not sure. I don't know what the behind the scenes plans are. I'm actually not part of the team. So everything that I'm about to say is the opinion of Christopher Harrison. I'm not certain. Honestly, it would kind of surprise me if they did, just because of where everything is sort of positioned, that the audience typically for something like this is going to be more public, is going to be more GitHub users than necessarily Azure DevOps users. So there might be plans, but if it happens, again, this is the opinion of Christopher Harrison and nobody else's opinion here. I would suspect that this would be something that would be coming much later if it does come. So yeah, again, who knows? I have no inside information. Everything that you just heard there, opinion of Christopher Harrison. Okay, cool. I'm gonna get a sip of coffee. Alrighty. Fantastic. I love it. Okay, cool. So with that, let's go ahead and let's start writing some code. And I'm actually going to jump right in to writing code. And the reason for that is because what I'm really going to try and show here as we go through the first set of demos here is the fact that Azure Static Web Apps is really designed to be my hosting platform. So there's nothing that's necessarily special that I need to do to take my website and be able to use it inside of Azure Static Web Apps. So I'm going to create my index.html here. I'm going to say before, oops, and set up my template. And I'm going to go with cute dogs. Anybody who's seen any of my web-based presentations in the past knows that I'm a huge dog lover. And so if I ever need an example, this is almost always where I wind up going. Now, I'm using an extension here for Bootstrap Snippets. And so that's what's automatically generated this right here. So nothing overly fancy with me using Bootstrap. If you have negative opinions on Bootstrap, that's fine. I love Bootstrap because Bootstrap makes it easy for me to be able to create a website that looks pretty good. I openly admit I am not a CSS guru. I know enough CSS to be able to do what it is that I need to do, but I really do try to take advantage of a framework whenever possible. You're also going to notice I'm even going to write a line of jQuery a little later. Don't hate me because of it. Again, every tool has its purpose. Okay. So let me sneak down here and I'm going to create a container. Actually, I'm just going to do it manually. Article and class equals container and like that. And then let's go ahead and create a real quick section here, and class equals list group. And then let's go ahead and say anchor href equals, and for right now we'll just say pound. We'll say class equals list group item, and we'll say, and I'm just going to hard code this for right now. Boom, boom, and then we'll say Roscoe. Okay, cool. All right, so there it is. There is our starting little website with just a little bit of hard-coded data. Let me also maybe set up an H1 or an H2 up here, since apparently that's where my fingers went, and I'm going to say cute dogs. Okay, Cool. All right. And I'm going to take advantage of another little plugin that I have called Live Server. If you're at all familiar with Light Server, Live Server is very similar to that. What this will do is it will automatically start my application, in this case on port 5500, and it will also set up a browser sync for me so that anytime that I save here, it will automatically refresh the page for me, so I can very easily see that. So 5500, and let me go to my browser, and now you can notice that that there it is. And Exeget says he appreciates or she appreciates the sentiment of my demo sites, and thank you. I appreciate it as well. Okay, cool. So there is our core little site right here where we're printing everything out. All right. Now, obviously hard-coded, not really what we're looking for. So let's go ahead and start to make this a little bit dynamic here. So let me create, make sure I'm on the right screen. There we go. Index.js. Let me create a JavaScript file here. Let me make sure that I register it. Script, actually, you know what I could do? I can just say script src, and then I can say .wack index.js. Cool. Alrighty. Dogs equals loop, and let's go ahead and for right now, we'll go ahead and just keep hard coding things, and we'll say name Sammy, and then we'll say name and Roscoe, and then let's go ahead and say function main and like this. Okay, I'm gonna do it this way just because I know eventually I'm going to want to make things async and so forth and so on. So that's what I'm going to do. All right. All right, so we got a suggestion from Exeget about more dogs of Sue, Wiggles, and Sophie. So there we go. There we go. And good morning, Sirax. Okay. Yep, we're doing JavaScript. Code in Python, learning game development in C#. Hey, you know, there's still stuff to learn, so you could still hang out and see what it is that we're doing. So cool. Alrighty. So now what I want to do inside of my main function here is I want to loop through all of those items, and I want to display out all of the dogs. So let's go ahead and function display dogs, and let's go ahead and say for let dog in dogs, and then what do I want? Dog item equals document create element anchor dog item href equals pound. Oops. So the question is, can you call a function before you make it? Absolutely, yeah. That one of the things that JavaScript will do is it will go grab all of the functions first, and then go from there. Dogs doesn't equal dog list. Right, yeah. So this is my dog list UI here. I'll flag that as UI. And let me make sure that I named it correctly out there. I did. Okay. Yep. Yeah. All right. Yep. No worries. No worries at all. Okay. Where was I? Dog item dot inner text equals dog dot name, and then I want dog item dot class equals list group item, and then dog list UI dot append child that dog item. Okay, I think I'm good here. Yep. Whoops. Undefined. 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 Why? Oh, there we go. Sorry, I've been writing too much Python of late, and so I really wanted that to be dog of dogs rather than dog in dogs. In Python, it's in, and in JavaScript, it's of. And making the switch back and forth from one language to another just always throws me. I don't know if anybody else is like that. One of the other things that I find is if I've been programming in, say, JavaScript for too long, when I go back to Python, I keep wanting to put semicolons at the end of everything, or vice versa, that if I'm doing too much Python, then I forget to put in my semicolons later on. So yeah, okay. So let's see. The question from Srax, like JS is hard, has document and so the question is about like doing a display like print. One thing about JavaScript is that console.log is pretty universal. So if you ever need to do a print, console.log will work almost anywhere inside of JavaScript. That it will work if you're hosting it in Node. It will work if you're hosting it in a browser. Like it will typically always work regardless of where you are. So Jessley asked the question, how easy is it to deploy a TypeScript app? And the fact that you asked that question warms my heart to no end, that I am a TypeScript developer through and through. And if I'm being honest, the only time that I write JavaScript these days is if I'm doing demos, because there's still just not enough people out there that know TypeScript to make it ubiquitous. And so as a result, I will do all of my demos in JavaScript, but if I'm writing real code, I'm absolutely doing it in TypeScript. So because of the fact that this is based on GitHub Actions, you can absolutely then just add in one additional action that would then transpile your TypeScript into JavaScript and then deploy that out that way. So it's 100% supported inside of this because of the fact that it's all done through GitHub Actions. So the answer to that question is it's actually relatively easy because it would just take an update inside of GitHub Actions to do exactly that. But the fact that this is based on existing technologies makes it very flexible in that regard. So yeah, you can absolutely do that in TypeScript. Okay, cool. All right. Okay. Yeah. All right. So now let's go ahead and go back to my browser here. Now that I've added in that bit of code, and now what you're going to notice is that sure enough, there is the list of everything. So there's all of my different items. Now I am going to continue to build on functionality. That one of the other things that I want to add into here is the ability to add new dogs, and then eventually, hopefully if we have time, be able to get into uploading pictures with all of this as well. So there is, for right now, our core site. You're going to notice that I built all of this using JavaScript and HTML, and that really is it. So let's just pause for a moment here, and let's just talk about doing development. So the question is, why not Blazor? Mostly just because of the fact that, again, it's not ubiquitous. I'm trying to stick with just index and just HTML and JavaScript. Okay, so let's talk for a little bit about the normal development cycle. So normally what you would do if you were starting up a project is you might go ahead and start writing a little bit of code. If you're anything like me, and I know I am, this is where I always start, that I just want to start taking whatever it is that's going on in my little brain here and then send it out the door from there. And so after you go in and you create this initial whatever it is that you're doing, then you'll typically go ahead and run your git init. You'll go ahead, create your repository, and you'll push your code out. And so that's exactly what I'm going to do next, is exactly that. So the next question comes in from Sirax, just HTML and JavaScript. What about CSS? It's pretty used as well. You're absolutely right. And I am using CSS, but I'm just using CSS through Bootstrap. And the reason that I'm using Bootstrap here is because I feel like Bootstrap is ubiquitous. And even if you're not already familiar with Bootstrap, there's nothing that's overly fancy here. That I'm taking advantage of Bootstrap just by using a couple of class names, and all that's doing, if I go back to my code here, I'm just using a couple of class names. That I'm using list group. I'm going to be using list group item. So like, even if you're not familiar with Bootstrap, you can just go, oh, okay, well, cool, that's a class name, and then, okay, cool, that's giving us the UX that we're seeing here. So you can really just sort of see all of that in action without necessarily knowing a lot about Bootstrap. So that's kind of why I like using Bootstrap whenever I'm doing quick and easy demos like this, especially because it's a nice way for me to create a UX that looks good without having to stop and go write a whole bunch of CSS to make that happen. Okay. So let's then turn our attention to the next step. So the next step would be to go ahead and create a brand new repository. So I'm going to call this ASWA dogs. I'm going to, whoops, make sure that I'm on my browser. Yep, okay, I am. Sorry about that. So yeah, so all I did was I just went into GitHub, created a new repository. I'm going to give this a name. I'm not going to worry about the description. I'm going to mark this as public, so that way everybody can have access to it. And then I'm going to create the repository. Chugga, chugga, chugga. And so if you actually want access to the code, you could go ahead and grab it from there. All right. Now, let me go ahead and make my life a little easier. Just copy that right there. Let me go back to my, my code. And then now let me say git init, git add, everything, git commit m, initial commit, and then git, whoops, need to add in my remote. Let me just paste all that in. There we go. Okay, cool. And so now this is pushing all of this out. So Sirax asked the question, this empo is empty. Absolutely. Literally everything that you're seeing me do right now, we're doing it live. So The question from GA Crow is, how about scaling the app using containers and orchestration? I'm guessing that's not what static apps are meant for. So the second half of that question is yes. So not what static apps are meant for. The answer to that is 100% yes. But let me talk a little bit about the first half of that app. The first half of that question. So the first half of this question is, what about scaling through containers and orchestration? So the way that static web apps is designed to work on the back end for all of my behind the scenes code is it's all going to be based on Azure Functions. Azure Functions is the serverless implementation that we have inside of Azure. So as a result, because of the fact that this is a serverless implementation, all of that stuff about scaling and everything else is taken care of for you automatically. That the whole concept of Azure Functions is to automatically scale up and scale down as you need. Now, if you are needing even more performance, if you are needing even more control over how things go along with this, you could, specific to Azure Functions, start taking a look at maybe premium hosting. You could take a look at maybe hosting this inside of an app service and actually, you know, set up a full app service all on your own. And then you could go ahead and start controlling your own containers and everything else. But at that point, like if that's the point that you're starting to get to and you're starting to think, hey, I really need to make sure that this thing it can scale all the way out and I get complete control over everything, then you're starting to cross that line of, yeah, this is really not what Azure Static Web Apps is built for. That Azure Static Web Apps is a fantastic tool if what you're trying to do is to create a full stack application, you're trying to maybe create say a static blog, you're trying to create a website where that level of performance, that level of control, that level of orchestration isn't necessarily what it is that I'm looking for. That if that is what you're looking for, and that's fantastic, but you're going to want to take a look potentially, very likely, at a different product than doing something like Azure Static Web Apps and taking a look at something like Functions. So again, you know, every tool has its own strengths and its own weaknesses. And that old saying, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, it's very much that same thing here, that you want to make sure that you're using the right tool for the job. Okay. So the question is the recording going to be available? It will be. YouTube.com, Microsoft Reactor. Okay. Cool. All right. So now let's go back to our GitHub repository, and you'll notice that that is all posted out. GA Crow asked the question, so if I have the need for a database, you can host that in Azure, use that and talk to it. I swear, GA Crow is not a plant. We're actually going to get into exactly that. So the answer to that question is yes, you can still use a database, and we're going to show off how you could use Cosmos to do that. Restor Jr. asks, so would Azure Static Web Apps be great for, say, a portfolio page, landing page for a project? And the answer to that question is yes, 100%. But I want to make sure that I'm clear here that I don't want you to think that the only thing that Azure Static Web Apps is good for is for proof of concept websites. And that's, of course, not to take anything away from proof of concept websites, because these are, you know, they're important. But Azure Static Web Apps can actually do a lot more than just that. that it is designed for that full stack. So if I'm creating a REST application and that if I'm creating a React application and that React application that I'm creating is really nothing but a facade for a bunch of back-end services, then you could absolutely do that with Azure Static Web Apps. And when you stop and think about web development, you know, it's funny, I've heard so many people say this, and so many people I respect say this for many years, is web dev is dead, web dev is dead, web dev is dead. Well, the fact that I'm here and the fact that you're here is proof of the fact that web dev is certainly not dead. But things are certainly shifting in this space. And so, so much of what we're doing these days is a lot about stringing different services together to create an application. And if that's what I'm trying to do, if that's what I'm targeting here, then I don't necessarily need to set up a full Express app to do that. That what I really need is to put together all of my client-side logic to be able to go grab all of the appropriate services. And then I just need a server component to maybe act as a traffic cop or to maybe help handle security and things like that. And that's exactly where Azure Static Web Apps can really shine, is in those types of applications. And again, if you think about it, that's a lot of what it is that we're trying to do is exactly that. So the next question is from Paymer, which is, what about security, adding certificate, enabling HTTPS, etc. So first thing about HTTPS, HTTPS in Azure is supported out of the box. So all you need to do is just HTTPS and voila, there you go. I also want to highlight the fact that you can set up your own custom domain, and then you could go ahead and set up your certificate from inside of there as well. So you could go ahead and do that. And then I also want to highlight the fact that authentication and authorization is also baked right in with all of this as well. So all of this is part of Azure Static Web Apps. So again, you know, going back to the question of, hey, is this targeted at just a portfolio page? The answer to that question is 100% no. That everything that you're going to need to create full stack applications is here inside of inside of Azure Static Web Apps. Okay, let's see. I think I've got all the questions. Hi, Deb Bambo. Nice to see you again. All right, cool. So there's my GitHub repository. Now let's go ahead and create my static web app. So now I'm inside of Azure. I'm going to say static web app, and then I'm going to hit create. And I'm going to create a new resource group. For those of you that are not familiar with Azure, resource group is just a collection of resources or a group of resources, thus the name resource group. See how that works? And then what you're going to notice is that it's going to ask me for the name for my Azure Static Web App. And I'm going to call this ASWA Dogs. Now, one big thing that's worth highlighting here is the fact that this does not become your URL. That what's going to happen instead is this is going to auto-generate a URL for you. And honestly, I prefer that, because one thing that I will find myself struggling with from time to time when I'm going in and creating a full-blown Azure website is the fact that so many of the names are already taken. And if you think about what it is that you're going to be doing when you're setting up a website, is that typically if I'm going to be pushing this out to the world, then I'm going to want this to have a custom domain. So what the name is while it's sitting inside of Azure Static, or inside of my development cycles, if you will, doesn't really matter, because if I need somebody to be able to access it, I don't mind just simply sending them the URL. So I kind of like it. Yeah, it's great not having to think of a name. Okay, I'm going to set up my region as West US 2. I'm going to leave the SKU as free, kind of nice. And then I'm going to click on sign in with GitHub, which will then show me all of my repositories, and then I'm going to choose master. So this is the repository that I just made a couple of minutes ago. You all saw me make that, and then there is the branch that I'm going to be using. Now I'm going to click on next and build. It's going to ask me where I want the application. It's going to ask me where I want the API from. And then if there are any artifacts, then I can go ahead and set those here. So there's been a lot of questions about, say, hey, if you're using React or if you're using, say, TypeScript. Well, let me talk about TypeScript for a second. One very common thing with TypeScript is to put all of your TypeScript code into a folder called SRC, and then all of the transpiled JavaScript into a folder called dist. If that's what you're doing, then you can actually just say right here, hey, this is where I want you to go find whatever my emitted code happens to be. Now, in my case, I'm not doing anything special here. I'm just doing HTML, JavaScript, and CSS through Bootstrap. And so I can just leave that blank. So I'm just going to leave that the way that it is. I don't need to worry about any tags. So I'm just going to hit review and create. And then I'm going to click on create. And we'll give this just a moment here. Chugga, chugga, chugga. Okay, and the deployment succeeded. My screen isn't up to date, but that's all right. So my deployment succeeded, and now I'm going to click on Go to Resource. If this wants to come up, am I still connected to the interwebs? I am. Oh, okay, cool. It's just taking it a second. All right, so it automatically set up a name of Polite Pebble, which I just absolutely love. That's fantastic. So you can actually go see the site right there. And then if we take a look over here on the left, the first thing that I want to highlight is the environment. And so what you're going to notice with my environments is I can get both a production and a staging if I so desire, and be able to swap those back and forth. You're also going to notice that it's already pulling from master. It's now just waiting for deployment from there. It's now uploading. And if I pause for just long enough here, there we go. Now you're going to notice that that's ready. And now if I click this little browse link, it's now going to open this up inside of a brand new tab. And you're going to notice that it lists off all of the dogs there, and it is in fact on that Polite Pebble. So just like that, really using tools that I was already familiar with, I was able to take that HTML, that JavaScript, and be able to push that out into Azure Static Web Apps. And again, this is really what makes this special, is the fact that it meets you where you're at, that you're already using GitHub, you're already writing your code, and it just works. So the question was about missing the that's not what I wanted to do. Missed the link to GitHub. If I create a resource, static web apps, and I hit create, you're going to notice right down here that there was the sign in with GitHub. And then when I did that, it now then asks me for the org, the repository, and the branch. So that's where I connected it right there. Okay. Cool, cool, cool. And so voila, I now have this deployed. And again, using tools that I was already familiar with. Okay. Let me go ahead and I'm going to create a real quick resource behind the scenes here. I'm just going to create an instance of Cosmos. So Cosmos is Microsoft's document database, and it does have the ability to do a MongoDB API. So I'm going to connect to this by using Mongoose. So there was a question earlier about, hey, could you also use data? And the answer to that is 100% yes. And this is exactly what I'm going to highlight here. So I've just configured it that way. And then I'm going to, I think I'm going to be okay here. Yeah, that looks good. That's fine. That's fine. Okay. Let me just go ahead and hit create. And then hit create. Okay, so effectively what I did is I set up a Mongo database inside of Azure. This is just going to take it a few minutes to create behind the scenes, which is why I always like to make sure that I do this in advance, so that way we don't have to wait for it later on. Okay. Cool, cool, cool. All righty. Let's see. Where am I? Okay. All right. Boop. Okay. Now, let's keep on keeping on, shall we? Let's go ahead and take a look at how we can start to make this page a little interactive. So I mentioned that what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to create new dogs inside of here. So we've got a hard-coded list for right now. I want to be able to create new ones, and then eventually what I want to be able to do is put a database front end or database back end to this front end. So I'm going to do a little bit of walk before I run here. And I'm going to create the JavaScript to be able to just add a dog to that list. And I'm also going to add in a modal dialog inside of here to do that. So I'm going to take advantage of the code snippets here. And I'm going to say modal customize. Yeah, that'll work. Okay. So what this is going to do, for those of you who are not already familiar with Bootstrap, so Bootstrap has a modal dialog component that's already built into it. And so modal dialog, of course, will just pop up then, you know, inside of your browser as a modal dialog, and then give you the ability to do whatever it is that, that you might want to do. Now, what's very nice is that it can use that little data target attribute to be able to automatically open up a modal dialog without me having to actually wire up an event handler. So what I need to do is just set the text on this to be add dog, and then I'm going to change the ID here to be dog form modal. Yeah, that's a good name. Okay, that'll work just fine. All right, so now if I save this and I go back to my browser, and I'm just going to run this locally. If I click on add dog, you're going to notice that it then pops up that little modal dialog for me. Okay, so now obviously I need a form. So let's start updating this. So we want a title, so we'll go ahead and say upload a cute dog. And then on the add rows here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this up as a form. and then I'm going to take advantage of the, there we go. Oh, switch screen, thank you. Sorry about that. There we go. That's better. Okay, so now all that I did, let me just back up here so you can see where I am. All that I did was I scrolled down into my the modal dialog, and now I'm just going to start putting the form and everything into there. So my title is now going to be upload cute dog, and then I'm going to on the body, I'm going to add in a form, and then I'm going to take advantage of my snippets here. So we'll say form input. My label will be name. My placeholder will be empty. The input type will be text. The ID of it will be dog name, and the help ID dog help name, and then the help text. Okay, provide the name of the dog. Okay. So it looks a little bit like this. And again, if I save this and I go back over here to my browser, when I click add dog, there now is my form. Now the close button will just automatically close that. The save, of course, we now want it to actually save something. So let's go ahead and say ID equals dog save. And then let's wire that up. So I'm going to say document get element by ID dog save, add event listener, click, and then we'll say save dog. Okay, so let's go ahead. Const name equals document get element by ID dog name value. Oops. No value. Stay. Good code. All right. All right, now let's go ahead and let's create a brand new dog. Const dog equals, and then we'll go ahead and just simply say name. By the way, for those of you who are not familiar with this syntax, I can't remember exactly when this became a thing in JavaScript or ECMAScript, but by just doing that, that's actually equivalent to me doing name, which is pretty slick. So I really like just being able to go bloop, and then it will just automatically have that property for me. So it just automatically adds in that, that implicit item. So nice little bit of shortcut text there. Okay, cool. So now I'm going to say dogs push, and then let's push in the new dog. And then now we want to add that into the display. And so I'm actually going to make my life a little easier here. I'm going to, let's do this. Not too worried about the constant lookups. I'm going to go ahead and just create a brand new function here. Add dog to display. And then that way I can just say add dog to display and then pass in the new dog. Okay, cool. All right. Yeah, just created a nice little helper function. Cool, cool, cool. I think I'm good. Yep. All right. Let's go ahead and save. Let's make sure that all of this works. So I'm going to say add dog, provide the name of the dog, and then we'll hit save. We should make sure that we close the modal dialog, and that is that's fine. I can do that in just a second here. But you're going to notice that now Artichoke is being listed there. So much rejoicing! Yay! Pretty cool. So now I've got all of that added in, and again, really doing nothing but JavaScript there. Let me just add in this data dismiss onto my save. Okay. I could also do that in the JavaScript, but I'm just going to make it a little bit easier. I'm just going to do that. So the question is, have we covered already why it's called a static web app? It seems that not a lot of the data is actually static. I'm not from the naming department. I don't know the answer to that. Okay. All right. Cool. Now let's just go back over here real quick. Let's just make sure that that is still working. Back into my browser. Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. So now I've got my page being interactive. Again, it's just going to be storing everything inside of client-side memory. But, you know, it's worth highlighting the fact that I can still, again, keep doing what I'm doing. That I could go ahead and say git add dot git commit m and add in, added the modal, and then git push, and then, whoops. Okay, cool. Actually, no, this is a really good thing. Okay. So what I did is I did a git commit, and then I tried to do a git push, and I got an error message. And the error message said, hey, there's something up on the remote. There's something up on GitHub that we weren't expecting. So this is actually really good this happened. Let's go take a look here. So I'm going to go back over to my GitHub repository. And if I hit refresh here, what you're going to notice is that there's now this new little folder here of GitHub workflows. And now you're going to notice that there's this YAML folder, or this YAML file. This right here, this is our GitHub action. So there's been a lot of questions about, hey, you know, like what if I want to use TypeScript, or what if I need to do this? If there's anything at all that you need to go in and modify and change and so forth, all of that is done right here inside of GitHub Actions. So again, it's taking advantage of the tooling that you're already familiar with to make this magic happen. It's pretty cool. Okay, so let's go back over here to my code then. Let's do a real quick git pull to go grab that. And there we go. And then now we'll do a git push. And now everything will get pushed up. And now if I go back to my browser and I go back to my Azure Static Web App and I go back to environments, now it's already saying ready. It might have already pushed it. Let's see. Let's go in and hit refresh. Nope, not yet. I thought that'd be a little fast. Eventually here, let's make sure my code actually pushed. 3 minutes ago. Yep, that looks good. Okay. We're just sort of waiting here. There we go. Okay. It takes just long enough to make you nervous. It's hard coded to do that. It's specifically coded to take just long enough to make you nervous, and then it works. Okay. Could I do the next code change on a branch? Sure, I could do that. Why not? There we go. Okay. And just go back to my browser. I just want to show the fact that it did deploy here. Cool. And then now if I hit refresh, now you're going to notice there's add dog. And then sure enough, add dog. Cool. All right. Now then, let's come back over here to code. Okay. Now, one of the things that I've already done is I've already installed onto Visual Studio Code I'm just grabbing the link here behind the scenes. There we go. Cool. I've already installed the functions tool to go ahead and give me the ability to create functions from right inside of Visual Studio Code. So when I hit this little Azure icon right over here, that's why it's there. Now, I'm going to create a function. I want to create a folder real quick first for them that I'm going to call API. And now let me go in and create my function. So I'm going to say, create a brand new project. And let me browse into that API folder that I just created. And I'm going to hit OK. And then it's going to say, all right, well, what language do you want? And I'm going to say JavaScript. And then it's going to say, all right, well, what template do you want? And I'm going to say HTTP trigger. And then it's going to ask me, well, what do you want to call it? And I want to call this dogs, and hit enter, and then an anonymous authorization level. Okay, so let's talk about what I just did, because I kind of moved fast there. So what I just did is I just added in Azure Functions. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Azure Functions is the serverless component inside of Azure. And the way that Azure Functions work is they execute based on a trigger. And so that trigger could be something that's been added into blob storage, that could be something's been added into, say, Cosmos DB, or in my case, it could be what's known as an HTTP trigger. And if you do an HTTP trigger, this effectively becomes just like a REST endpoint. And so this is going to be executed based on somebody calling this just like any other REST endpoint. And so you would notice right here that it's going to be able to read off of the request. It's going to look inside of the query string, see if there's something inside of there. If not, it's going to look inside of the body, see if there's something inside of there. And if there is in one or the other, then it will just go ahead and in our case, return back a hello and the rest of it. Otherwise, it's going to go ahead and give us an error message. So in our case, a 400. So all of this is, you know, it's just server-side JavaScript. It's going to look a little bit similar, but yet a little bit different to, say, Express or Restify. But you are going to notice that you'll be able to take advantage of a lot of the tools that you're already familiar with. Speaking of taking advantage of tools that you're already familiar with, how about we go into our package.json file? So this package.json file, because we're creating server-side code here, is going to give us the ability to install any node packages that we might like. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change directories into API, and I'm going to say npm install mongoose. Oops. Install with 2 L's. There we go. Now, for those of you that are not already familiar with Mongoose, Mongoose is a mapping tool to make it easier to work with some form of a Mongo database behind the scenes. Now, I'm going to start this by doing everything locally. So I've got Mongoose installed locally, and I'm going to connect to that and run from there. But I also do have the ability to connect this up into Cosmos, because Cosmos does support a Mongo API as well. So Arcnix asked the question, ORM, or Object Relational Mapping. So personally, in my normal everyday speech, I would call Mongoose an ORM. Now, I avoid that sometimes in public settings like this, because if somebody wants to get pedantic, they would point out the fact that it's not truly an ORM, because you're not mapping back to a relational database, because after all, Mongo is NoSQL. Okay, that's fine. To me personally, I don't get into that fine level of detail, because a lot of people are already familiar with what an ORM does. And to a certain extent, I mean, Mongoose is doing a lot of that same functionality from the developer's perspective. What it's doing behind the scenes is kind of irrelevant, and not a lot of people are paying attention to that. So, I mean, for me personally, I call it an ORM, even though I know that technically that's not correct, because it's not doing relational mapping, and that's fine, but it is serving a very similar purpose. So that's why I didn't say ORM, but yeah, ORM, it works. Okay. Alrighty. So now that I've got Mongoose installed, let's go ahead and start to create everything that I'm going to want here. So I'm going to say modals.js. And so with Mongoose, what I can do is I can create a schema, which is going to be, hey, this is how I want my object to look. And then I can create a model, which is then going to start acting as that go-between. So I'll say from writing Python here, const mongoose equals require, there we go, mongoose const dog schema equals new mongoose schema, and actually name string. Oops. No, I was right the first time. Hold on one sec. Bloop, bloop. And now I've got, hold on, I've got typos all over the place. There we go. That looks a little bit better. Okay. Cool, cool. All right. So my schema here is going to define what the structure is going to look like inside of the database. If you wanted to, you could also start to get fancier here. So you could start to say things like whether or not this is going to be required. You could start to set up validation, things like that. So there's a lot of extra fancy things that you could do here. But in my case, just setting it up as a string is going to work just fine. And then I'm going to say module exports dog equals, and we'll say mongoose document, oops, sorry, mongoose model. There we go. That looks a little better. And then I'm going to give this a name of dog, and then I'll specify my dog schema like that. Okay. Cool, cool, cool. As soon as I learn how to type. There we go. That looks better. All right. Yep. Much better. Yeah, anytime you don't get IntelliSense when you were getting it a second ago, that should always give you pause that you might have a typo. And so, yeah, I just needed a lowercase m. All right. So this is now going to become the model for our for our dogs. And so now I'm going to come inside of my index.js, and I'm going to start to set up everything for working with our dogs. I'm actually just going to eliminate everything that's there, and then I'm going to start to add in the rest of my code. GOKGB asks C# versus JavaScript. As of right now, only JavaScript is supported for Azure Static Web Apps. If you're asking about my personal preference about C# or JavaScript, my answer would be TypeScript. So yeah, const mongoose equals, and then I'm going to say require mongoose. And then I'm going to say const models equals require, and then I'm going to say whack my models. Okay. And then eventually I'm going to need to connect to a database, but I'll come back to there. Okay. You can host Blazor WebAssembly in Azure Static Web Apps. Oh, well, there you go. Fantastic. All right. I'll openly admit I'm not a Blazor developer yet. Okay. So GA Crow asked the question, but for this function, could we use other languages, Python, C#, etc.? So if you are going to create a function and deploy it out manually and do cross-site requests, the answer to that question would be yes. But as of right now, for Azure Static Web Apps, the only language that's supported is JavaScript. Okay. Yep. Okay. Cool. Alrighty. So now let's go ahead and I'm going to say, I'm going to do something a little bit funny. I'm going to say const response equals context.res equals type. Okay. So let me talk about what's going on here. So if I open up my function JSON file, what you're going to notice here is that we've got this fun little thing called bindings. And so what bindings will do is it will give your function the ability to communicate a little bit with the outside world. And in our case, what we want to be able to communicate with is whatever data it is that's come in, and then be able to send something out. And in our case, we're going to send out HTTP via response. And the way that we're going to be able to send that out is by using this little res object right here. This is our response. So what's going to happen is Functions is going to look for whatever this res object is going to be. So I'm going to take advantage of the reference capabilities inside of, well, any programming language really, and I'm going to create a brand new variable here called response. I'm going to set it equal to whatever's inside of context res, so this is what's going to go out. And then I'm just going to, for right now, set the content type to be application JSON because I know that that's what it's always going to be. So this is really just a convenient way for me to grab the response to set up what's going to be sent to the client. So just sort of a shortcut way for me to go ahead and do that. The next thing that you're going to notice is we have the ability to detect both a get and a post. And traditionally, of course, get means I want to see data, and post means I'm going to create something brand new. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to add in my code to look for a get, and if it's a get, I'm just going to send down all the dogs that we have in the database. And if it's a post, then I'm going to take whatever it is that you gave to us, and I'm going to put that into the into Cosmos. So the question is asked. the question was asked, what's the main advantage to this? And the main advantage is, in my opinion, is the ability to integrate with existing tools. So you're going to notice here that I'm using VS Code, that I'm writing JavaScript, that I'm deploying this out to GitHub, and Azure Static Web Apps very much just meets me where I'm at. And then also the ability to work with Azure Functions, which will give me that like automatic scaling and so forth. So it does all of this for me without me having to really do a whole heck of a lot. And it's also actually very affordable. Okay, so there's the answer to that question, Arcnix. All right, so let's go ahead and add in a brand new dog. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that we've got a name inside of the body that's been sent up. So I'm going to say if rec.body and rec.body.name. So now I know that I've got a name. And the other thing that I could do here, so Pepsi asked, would I call this a Jamstack app? No, I would call it an Azure Static Web Apps app. Okay. So if I wanted to, I could at this point go ahead and say response.status equals 400, just to indicate an error message saying, hey, we need a name. And then I could also add in error messages and so forth. I'm not really going to worry about error handling though. All right. So now what I want to do is I want to create a brand new application and or a brand new object. So I'm going to say const dog equals models dog create, and then so the question is static free from Nature Hermit? The answer to that question is, as of right now, it is. There very well may be a pricing model later, but as of right now, it is. Although one thing to keep in mind is the fact that this is designed to be built on a lot of very cheap or free services inside of Azure. So even if there is going to be some level of scaling later on or any level of costs later on, it is designed to be very, very, very cost effective going forward. So as of right now, it's free, but what the pricing model is going to look like remains to be seen. But let me again stress, it's designed to work on top of a bunch of very cost-effective services inside of Azure. So I don't expect any great pricing to go along with this. What extension am I using? At the moment, JavaScript. I might have like a color thing about like all of my parentheses and my curly braces and so forth. And honestly, I don't even know. I've been using VS Code for so long, and when I first installed it, I installed like all the extensions, and I've weeded a lot of them out, but I still have some that are sitting there. And at this point, I don't even know what I've got left anymore. So the Nature Hermit asked storage for the code as well. Absolutely. Yep. Okay. Cool. All right. So let's come back over here. Let's talk about this. So what we're doing is that, if you remember, inside of our little models, we created a brand new mongoose model that we called dog. And this is now going to both act as the model, but it's also going to give us the ability to create the object inside of the database. And so that's what's happening here, is it's creating the model inside of the database. That's why I need the await, because this is of course going to leave my service. Anytime that you go to the outside world, you should always have an await. So that's why I've got that right there. So this is going to give me the dog, and now I can go ahead and say response.body equals the dog that we just created. So there's creating a new one. For returning all of them, now what I could go ahead and do is say rec.body, sorry. I can just say response. Here we go, .body. Equals dogs await dog bind bloop bloop. Okay, so what's happening here, I apologize if you can hear the background. The landscapers are outside and mowing the grass out in our complex. So now what we're going to do, if you just do a get, is we're going to send down all of the dogs that we have here. So that's why I've got my little await. The exec is going to cause this to execute. If you don't do that, this just gives you a query back, and it doesn't execute until you tell it to. So that way you could actually start to put other things to it. So the mention here was mentioned about bind. So I could, if I want to, go ahead and bind to Cosmos DB as part of a function. You're absolutely right, I could do that. In my case, I'm not doing that because I want to be able to show that you can use existing tools. So if you're already using Mongoose, if you're already a big fan of Mongoose, which I am, then you can just keep using that. So you don't necessarily have to use bind. Bind is a great little convenience tool in functions, but just because it's there doesn't necessarily mean that you have to use it, and it doesn't always mean that it's the right answer. So it really just depends on what it is that you're doing there. So, yep. What am I using for my database? I'm going to be using Mongo locally, and then I'm going to be using Cosmos remotely. All right. Let's see. I'm just going to look at my code here for a second. I just want to make sure that I'm right. I was answering a lot of questions in the middle, which is great. I'm not complaining about questions. Ask all the questions. It just means that I just need to make sure that all my code looks good. It does. Okay, cool. All right. Now, the last thing that I need, to do is I need to now connect to my database. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say mongoose connect, and then it's going to ask me for my URI, and I'm going to say process.env.mongo URI, just like that. Now, let's talk about this for a second. Process.env. So Alan asked the question, can I show the expected cost for a month of the year? And the answer to that question is no, because as of right now, this is a free service. It's going to be based on functions, so you could go look at costing on functions and start to dig a little bit deeper into there. But because of the fact that this is in preview, as of right now, this is a free service. That's almost certainly going to change, but I don't know when that's going to change, and I don't know what the pricing is going to look like. My assumption is because of the fact that this is heavily based on Azure Functions, that it's going to be very tightly tied to the costing of Azure Functions, and so you can go check that out. There. Okay, and then the other question from Moshko is, do companies use SQL for databases? And the answer to that question is yes, absolutely. Relational databases are still extremely popular. So G.A. Crow asks, so as of now, even functions come free when used with static web apps? Well, to be fair, you've always had a free tier of functions that that you still get like a million executions and a lot of memory time and so forth and so on. Now, what I don't know, because I will openly admit I'm not a pricing guru, is if there is some limitation on how far you can go with the functions as part of Azure Static Web Apps. But let's also be clear about something. This is a preview service. So you should not be putting production onto preview services yet. That the whole concept of preview is to be able to get in and test and play and so forth and so on. Okay, let's see. Now, let's come back over here. So what you're going to notice is that I'm pulling in my URI from my environmental variables. That's where Mongo URI, or that's where process env comes into play. Now, what's really cool about working with Azure Functions is this little thing called Localsettings.json. Anything you put inside of here will automatically become an environmental variable. So what I can go ahead and do is I can say Mongo URI. I can then say MongoDB : localhost whack ASWA dogs. And again, in my case, I'm using my local Mongo. So now, if I save this, that will automatically be picked up as part of that localsettings.json. What you'll also notice is that that's slightly grayed out. And the reason for that is because it's listed inside of my git ignore. Yeah, right down here. It's listed inside of my git ignore, so that way I don't accidentally push this out. Okay, so there is that. Let me go ahead and start my function to make sure that it's working. Func start host. No red, no red, no red. Cool. All right. Let's see. I've got about 13 minutes left. Can we do it? Alrighty. Now, let's go ahead and let's start off by getting rid of all of our hard-coded values. On main, let's go ahead and say await load dogs, and let's make sure that this is marked as async, like that. Cool. And then I also know that save dog is going to need to be async as well. Okay. You're very kind. Thank you, Nature Hermit. Okay. Okay. Async. Load dogs. All right. And now I want to. Oops, not async. Come on. Await. Now I'm going to do is I'm going to say const response equals await fetch. There we go. That looks a little better. Okay, cool, cool, cool. All right. All right. Moshko asked the question, what does the async keyword do? That's unfortunately going to take me a little bit longer to get through. So unfortunately, just in the sake for the sake of timing, I'm gonna have to pass on that. The question is, does main need to be awaited? The answer to that is no. It's a funny little JavaScript thing that it will just automatically make it synchronous. I actually can't call await there, and in fact, if you want to do an await, this is sort of the way that you have to do it in JavaScript. And yeah, Alan asked the question, different from C#. It's similar, but different. Yeah. Okay. So what I'm doing here is I'm now calling that service that I'm about to create. So there is all of the retrieved dogs. We're then going to add them in one at a time, and then we're done. Let me go down to my save, and let's see, we've got our dog. Let's go ahead and now do this. Let's say const response equals await fetch API dogs, and then post, and then body I think that's good. Yeah. Yep. Okay. And so here's what I'm doing here is effectively the same thing that we had before. It's just this time I'm going to push up the dog. I also want to make sure my header that I've got my content type to be application JSON. Like that. Okay. Alrighty. Yeah. Cool. All right. There we go. So there's my response. I think all of that looks good. Yeah. Okay. Now, there's one last little thing that I need to do, and this is just for my local dev here, is I just need to go into my settings, and I need to tell my live server that when it sees anything with API, to instead route it to 7071. I think that should be good there. Just gonna make sure. Nope. Okay, there we go. All right. Cool. Okay, so what I did here is this is a little thing that just needs to be done because of the fact that I'm running this on my on that live server that we were talking about a few minutes ago. That normally what it would want to do is keep everything just right here where we are. When I'm making calls, I now need to go to my little locally running function. So that's just what I need to do. Yeah, exactly. There's no place like 127001. All right, now let's go ahead and see what's going on here. Cool. So what we're going to notice is that I've got an error message on oh, okay, I've got 2 errors. Well, that one's irrelevant. What is this one? That's weird. Oh gosh. So I'm trying to figure out why this is now not working. So we're really cooking here. What was that URL? Okay, that looks good. That's fine. Oh, I know what I did wrong. I know what I did wrong. Right. Okay, sorry. Yeah, if you remember what I did when I was sending the response back is I put it into a property called dogs. So that's what I need to do is I need to say .dogs here. There we go. Now, here we go. Let's try this again. Boop-a-doo. Yoink. Okay, that's fine. Add, boom. There we go. Okay, cool. Yes. Now, all right, I had one little typo in there. So now what you're going to notice is now I could start adding in brand new dogs here. And now you're going to notice that those are now being saved out. I also want to highlight the fact, now I'm on the right screen right now. I am where I need to be. So yeah, so I also want to point out the fact that inside of my code, yeah, I just have one little typo here that I fixed. What I want to also point out is if I connect up to my local Mongo and I go into my documents, what you're going to notice is that I now have two items right here. And so both of those are now inside of my local Mongo. So the next thing then becomes, all right, well, how do we go ahead and deploy this out? Okay. Oh, come on. Oh, okay, cool. All right, that's good. All right, so I went ahead, added everything in, and now, as per the request, what you're going to notice if I go back over here is that now I've got my cool little branch. Let me go ahead and do a compare. And let me go ahead and create my pull request. Can I do it the right way? And then I'm just going to merge this, hit merge. And now this will eventually get deployed out. Now, one thing, though, that I am going to need is I am going to need to update this to point to my Cosmos DB. So I'm going to open up my Cosmos DB here. This is going to give me that connection string right here. I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to store this inside of my ASWA dogs. That if I go into my configuration, I've got application settings. Oh, gotta wait for it to finish deploying. Come on. All right. There we go. Okay, so I want to highlight two things here. Number one is That's okay, Russ. Russ just said he just figured out what ASWA means. Yeah, that's totally cool. So what I want to highlight here is the fact that I've got my production and I've got my staging. The reason that staging is now highlighted is because I've got that separate branch here. So if I wanted to go in and do any form of like hot swapping or anything like that, then I could actually do that right here. That's pretty darn cool if you wanted to. Okay, there we go. Now that's ready. Now let me go back over here to my configuration. I'm gonna have to get out of here in about 30 seconds. So I'm gonna make this really quick here. Mongo URI, I'm gonna paste in that URL that I mentioned a second ago, and retry rights equals false. Just trust me, I just need to add that in. And now I'm gonna say okay. There we go. And I'm going to hit save. And now what you're going to notice here is when I go back to the deployed app, nothing here. When I click on add dog and I specify a name and I hit save, I'm going to get an error message. This might just be a deployment issue yet. It might just be, yeah, it's giving me, okay. Mongo URI. Let me make sure that that was what I called it in my code. So I'm trying to move really fast. There's somebody that starts streaming in just a couple of minutes here, so I want to get out of their way. Okay, yeah. All right. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to bring this together. Yeah, there was a lot that was going on. There was a lot of fantastic questions, and yeah, okay. What I want to highlight though is that the only last missing piece here is just the getting it to connect to the server. I do want to highlight though, right here you're going to notice I was able to still use local Mongo. This does work with Cosmos. It's just giving me an error message somewhere along the way here, and I'm not quite sure what's going on with it. API dogs, like it should work just fine here. I think it's just either taking it a second, that there's just like an update that needs to be done, or otherwise. So there's that. I do want to thank everybody for tuning in. This is my time. I've actually gone a couple minutes over. I need to bail. I need to get out of here and make space for the next person. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Please come find me. I'm Geek Trainer basically everywhere, and hopefully in the not too distant future I'll be able to come back and pick this up again later on. Thank you everybody for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.